Blood coated her hands before she even realized its source. The prairie heat clung to her skin like a smoldering brand. Each step toward the solitary shack grew heavier than the one before. Lyra knew she'd been running for hours through sagebrush and grit, hunted by a handful of men who vowed she belonged to them. Now her breath shattered into ragged gasps. Every rustle behind her sounded like death creeping nearer. When she reached a door, she pounded it with her fist. The sound was faint. Her voice quavered. "Please, help me!" And she crumpled, one knee hitting the weathered porch. Inside, a man glanced up from his battered shotgun. Amos Kane, 53, a widowed farmer, with a face etched by wind and solitude. He hadn't crossed paths with another soul in days. Some men go months without a voice to echo back, and when one finally breaks the silence, it shifts everything. When he cracked the door, the scent of blood hit first, and something softer followed, a faint sweetness, lavender. The fragrance drifted from the young woman's hair, mingling with the dry air and the worn leather of his jacket. For a moment, it was like two worlds inhaling each other. Her hand gripped her side, the cloth soaked dark with blood. She murmured, hoarse but firm, "I'm taking it off. Please, just be fast." Her voice broke on the last word. Amos froze. He'd seen suffering before. Brawls, fevers, shattered men, but never a woman this young. Trembling and half feral, standing in his doorway with blood trailing down her leg, fear bright in her eyes. He gave a quiet nod. She peeled back the fabric just enough to reveal the gash at her hip. It was bad, but not fatal. He grabbed whiskey, needle, and thread. He passed the needle through a flame, the way ranchers did when healers were days off. He tore a strip of clean linen for a bandage, tight enough to stem the flow, loose enough to let her breathe. His hands were calloused, his breath even, the scent of gunpowder and rawhide clinging to him. When the needle pierced her skin, she bit her lip to stifle a cry. Outside, the wind shook the porch planks. The old hound's shadow growled softly, her ears pricking to the distant clatter of hooves down the gully. Amos flicked his eyes toward the sound, then back to the woman. Her pulse thrummed under his fingers. She smelled of fear and lavender. "The blood's still seeping through," he muttered low. "Who did this to you?" Her eyes snapped open, glassy and worn. "You wouldn't believe me if I said," she grimaced, "but they're coming back." He studied her, then glanced at the open prairie beyond the shack's door. Somewhere in that wavering heat, riders were drawing closer. He tied the final knot, wiped the sweat from his brow, and met her gaze. Helping her meant trouble. Turning her away meant she'd be dead by dusk. The air grew thick, heavy with blood, gunpowder, and lavender. He whispered, almost to himself, "Who are you really? And what are you running from?" Night fell fast on prairie. By the time Amos finished stitching her wound, the shack smelled of whiskey, sweat, and that faint lavender still hanging in the air. He dimmed the lantern, its flame flickering like it was afraid to be noticed. She sat silent on the edge of the cot, eyes half closed. Shadow lay at her feet, one ear twitching to the distant hum of cicadas. Amos poured a shot of whiskey and offered it. "You drink?" She shook her head. He gave a small grin. For a man like Amos, grins were scarce, like snow in August. And maybe it was the first moment she let out a real breath. He asked her name again. "Clara Holt," she said, her voice cracking like the name itself stung to say. She didn't mention where she came from or who pursued her, but she looked at him almost pleading he wouldn't press further. And he didn't. He just nodded slowly and said, "You're safe here tonight." The wind stirred outside, a coyote howled. Then came the sound that knotted his gut. Hooves. Not far off. Amos snuffed the lantern and slipped to the window. Dust swirled in the moonlight. 2 riders, maybe 3. The prairie held its breath with them, waiting to see who'd move first. He turned to Clara. Her hands clutched the blanket. Her lips moved, soundless. He whispered, "If they spot you here, you're finished." She nodded, eyes wide and glassy. The knock came soft, then harder. Shadow barked once, sharp and alert. Amos opened the door halfway. 2 lawmen stood there, badges glinting faintly in the lantern glow from outside. They asked if he'd seen a young woman traveling alone, hair like honey in the lamplight, wounded on her side. Amos didn't flinch. "She's my wife," he said. The words came out smooth, steady. A lie so clean even Shadow went quiet. The men peered past him, catching Clara's shadow in the dim light. 2 tin cups sat on the table, a scarf draped over the chair, simple proof of a woman's presence. One tipped his hat. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Kane." They rode off slowly into the night. Amos shut the door, leaned against it, breathing hard. Clara stared at him, her voice shaky. "You didn't have to do that." He looked at her, half smiling. "Well, guess I just did." Outside, the wind swallowed the hoofbeats. Inside, for the first time that night, she smiled. Not from joy, but from something gentler. Hope. Amos sat back down, poured another drink, and slid the glass to her. "Drink now," he said. She took it, her fingers grazing his. The scent of lavender rose again between them. And in that quiet, something began to shift, but neither noticed the shadow slipping behind the shed. It wasn't alone. The next morning, the prairie woke slow. Amos stepped onto the porch, shotgun in hand, scanning the sunlight creeping over the hills. Shadow padded beside him, nose twitching at the faint trace of smoke on the breeze. Behind him, Clara stood quiet, wrapped in his old quilt. The lavender scent was faint now, buried under dust. He poured her coffee, black and bitter. She sipped and winced. "I used to drink tea," she said, trying to smile. He chuckled. "Out here, tea don't last. Coffee keeps you moving." Her laughter faded. She looked toward the creek, eyes heavy with something unspoken. "They'll come again," she said. Amos nodded. He already knew. Trouble around here never traveled solo. It always brought company. He'd seen their kind before, men with badges but cruelty in their gaze. That night she told him the truth. She'd worked at the silver mine in Redstone. Her hands still bore the scars from the labor, faint cuts that prairie never healed. When the foreman's brother tried to force himself on her and she fought back, they branded her a thief, claimed she'd stolen wages. Then they sent men to track her down. Amos's jaw tightened. He spat into the dirt. "Some truths taste better after you spit out the rot. That ain't justice. That's evil dressed in fine clothes." He spent the next day checking shells, cleaning the shotgun and oiling the saddle. The smell of leather and gunpowder thickened the air. Shadow trailed him, tail stiff, ears alert. He tied a white cloth to the porch rail, one that once belonged to his late wife, a quiet vow there'd be no more running. That evening, clouds rolled in from the east, and thunder grumbled low, like something stirring awake. Amos packed a small bag with bread, water, and extra rounds. He turned to Clara. "When the time comes, we stand, not hide." She met his eyes, pale but resolute. "I'm done running," she said. For the first time, he believed her. Later, they stood by the Redstone Creek, the water dark and uneasy. Fireflies blinked around them. She reached out, touched his arm lightly. "Why help me, Amos?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Guess I've been waiting a long time for something worth standing for." The wind rose. Shadow barked once toward the ridge, sharp and certain. 3 riders appeared in the distance, just shapes against the stormy sky. Amos chambered around, slow and steady. The storm was coming, and so were they. Before the fight began, let me ask you something. If you were in Amos's boots, would you stand and fight or walk away? Take a deep breath, pour yourself a cup of tea, and tell me what time it is where you're listening from. And if you'd like to ride along for the rest of this Wild West story, hit that subscribe button and stay with me. The storm broke over the prairie just as the sun began to sink. The first drops hit dry earth and turned it to mud in seconds. Amos led Clara and Shadow down the dry gully toward the old town of Dust Hollow. Once it had been alive with prospectors and outlaws. Now only crumbling walls and ash remained. The wind carried the scent of rain and gunpowder. He could feel it. Trouble was near. Every storm in these parts carries more than just rain. Some bring judgment. They took shelter in the husk of an old tavern. The roof was half collapsed, lightning flashing through the gaps above, lighting Clara's face pale against the dark. Amos checked his shotgun again. Shadow stood by the doorway, tail rigid. Clara pressed her hand to her healing side, testing her weight on the bad leg. The bandage held, the pain sharp but bearable. "I can fight," she said softly. Amos looked at her and smiled. "You just keep breathing. That's enough." Then came the sound they'd been dreading. Hooves, 3 riders cutting through the rain, shouting to each other. One called her name, the voice cold and vicious. She froze for a moment. Even the thunder paused, like the sky itself was watching. Amos stepped closer, his boots sinking in the wet earth. "Stay low," he whispered. The first shot tore through the storm. Glass shattered from the tavern window. Amos dropped behind a fallen timber, fired once, and one rider hit the ground hard. The echo rolled down the creek bed. The second man tried to flank them. Shadow bolted into the open, barking loud enough to draw fire. Amos used the moment, aimed through the broken wall, and fired again. A horse screamed and fell. The third rider shot wildly, bullets splintering the doorway. Clara grabbed the small revolver from Amos's saddlebag and aimed with trembling hands. She fired once, aiming for the largest shape, not the face. Luck met her courage. The gun bucked. The last rider slumped into the mud. For a moment, there was only the sound of rain. Amos lowered his shotgun, breathing hard. Shadow limped back inside, fur soaked, eyes bright. Clara sank down beside her, tears blending with the rain on her face. Amos looked at her, then out toward the ridge. The lightning faded. The storm began to ease. Justice had come, quiet and final. He walked to the doorway, watching the creek swell. The smell of wet leather, smoke, and faint lavender hung in the air. Her honeyed hair clung to her face, dusty and damp. He whispered, more to himself, "Guess we made it through." She smiled, weak but real. "For now," she said. Outside, thunder rumbled one last time, but in that sound there was a question. When the sun returns, will peace stay, or will the past find them again? When the rain stopped, the world smelled clean again. Amos and Clara rode back toward the shack, the air cool and still after the storm. The scent of rain lingered on their clothes, heavy and sweet, like the memory of fear slowly fading. Clara glanced back once at the trail behind them, half expecting the ghosts of last night to linger. The Redstone Creek shimmered under the fading light, and for the first time in years, Amos felt something close to calm. Shadow trotted beside the horse, wet but proud. Clara reached down, patted the dog's head. "She's brave," she said softly. Amos nodded. "Lost her old master a while back. Guess she knows what it's like to start over." His eyes softened when he said it, and for a second she saw the man he was before life turned hard. Maybe that's what survival really is, learning to be kind again after the world's been cruel. Clara smiled. "Maybe we all do." Back at the shack, the sky burned gold over the plains. The scent of wet earth mixed with the faint lavender still clinging to her hair. That smell filled the small room, wrapping them in something they didn't dare name yet. Peace, maybe,
or the start of something they'd stopped believing in. Amos built a small fire. The flames danced slow, casting soft light over two people who'd nearly lost their place in the world. The crackle of wood filled the quiet between them. She handed him his coffee tin, warm and black. She said, "Guess I got used to the taste." He chuckled. "Guess you did." Days turned to weeks. Her wound healed and the nightmares began to fade. She walked a little farther each morning, the pain answering with smaller steps. She learned to ride, to mend fences, and to laugh again. Sometimes her laughter spooked the horses, and Amos found himself smiling without meaning to. The shack, once heavy with silence, now hummed with life. Even Shadow wagged her tail more, as if she finally trusted joy to stick around. Amos repaired the porch, hung a wind chime made from old bullet casings. When the breeze blew, it sang like soft prayers over the valley. One morning they rode to the small chapel in Willow Bend. No music, no crowd, just a simple vow to stand by each other. The preacher said only 4 words: "Love is quiet work." Amos never forgot that. The preacher smiled. Sometimes love doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be steady. That night back at the shack, Clara set her bottle of lavender beside his worn leather belt. 2 cents, once worlds apart, now lived under one roof. Amos looked out the window. The sky stretched wide and endless. He whispered, "Maybe second chances don't come easy, but when they do, you hold on tight." Clara took his hand and said, "And you never let go." The story of Amos and Clara isn't about luck. It's about standing when life knocks you down. It's about finding something worth fighting for, even when the odds are grim. Maybe you've been through your own storm. Maybe you carry scars no one else sees. Maybe you've loved and lost and rebuilt yourself from pieces you didn't know you had. Maybe you've had to stitch yourself back together more than once. But like Amos, maybe your next sunrise is closer than you think. So take a deep breath, pour yourself a cup of tea, look out your window and tell me, what would you fight for if the world pushed you to the edge? If this story moved you, give it a like. And if you want more tales from the Wild West, where every scar tells a story and every story has a heart, hit that subscribe button and stay a while. 'Cause sometimes the wildest places hide the gentlest love. And if you're still here listening, maybe that gentle love is something you've been chasing too.